The arrow misses her ribs by inches. Khaleesi drives forward through the pine trees, her golden skin slick with blood, breath ragged. Behind her, torches, voices, the thunder of hooves cutting through the winter forest. They're hunting her. The prophecy said she would bring change. The clans heard destruction and decided to stop her before it started. 20 hunters, arrows, spears, a blood oath sworn to drag her back in chains or drag back her head. She stumbled into a clearing. The village beyond, small, human, worthless, no refuge. She wouldn't make it past the tree line before the first arrow found her spine. Her ribs screamed. The blade went deep 3 days ago. She's been running since. Her legs gave out. A figure emerged from the undergrowth, tall enough to block the wind, but nothing like her. Just a man. Thin, worn humans. He was gathering firewood when he saw her collapse. "Please," she gasped, her massive hand closing around his wrist with enough force to crush bone. "Don't let them find me." His eyes went wide. He could have run. Should have run. Instead, he picked her up. She was 6.5 feet of muscle and rage, and he carried her like she weighed nothing, into a cottage, into the dark. He barred the door just as the first torch appeared at the tree line. Outside, voices shouting her name. Inside, a stranger with blood on his hands, asking no questions, making a choice that would get him killed. The door wouldn't hold. Jon's cottage was barely larger than a hunting shack. 1 room for living, 1 for sleeping, a stone hearth that held more heat than his entire life ever had. He'd built it himself over 7 years. Nobody in the village visited. Nobody missed him when he didn't come to town. That was fine. He preferred it. Now there was a golden orc bleeding on his only bed. He worked fast, hands steady. Cut away her clothes. Black leather, expensive, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. The wound was deep, infected, 3 days old, maybe 4. She'd been running for days. She woke up when he poured water over it. "Don't!" Her voice was gravel and iron. "Leave me. Go. You'll die. Better than captured." Jon said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence was easier than argument. He cleaned the wound, packed it with yarrow and comfrey, bound it tight. Her hand remained clenched, ready to kill him. He worked around it. By nightfall, her fever spiked. She thrashed, calling out in a language Jon didn't know. Sharp sounds, commanding, desperate. She reached for weapons that weren't there. Once she grabbed his throat, and for a moment he saw the warrior beneath the wounded animal. Then her eyes went unfocused again, and she collapsed back into the sheets. He sat by the fire and waited. The next morning, when her eyes cleared, she studied him like he was a problem to solve. "What is your name?" "Jon. And you are?" "What, a servant?" "A slave." "I'm a woodcutter. This is my house." She absorbed this gaze, sweeping the modest space, the hanging herbs, the worn furniture, the poverty written into every corner. Her lip curled. Then something shifted in her face. Fear, maybe. Or shame. "Your village. They know I'm here." It wasn't a question. No. Jon brought her water, food, thin broth, bread. "I keep to myself." They don't ask questions. She didn't eat. She stared at the water like it might be poison, and he realized she was used to being served. Used to people saying yes without thinking. Used to obedience. "You should turn me in," she said quietly. "But they would pay you gold, land?" Jon didn't answer. He turned back to the fire and added wood. Outside, the wind picked up. Through the cottage's single window, the forest darkened. Somewhere out there, torches still flickered between the trees. The hunters hadn't left. They'd simply fallen back to wait. They knew she was here. They were just making sure she couldn't run. The orc watched him stoke the fire. And something in her expression changed. Not trust, but recognition. Like she was seeing him for the first time. Like she was beginning to understand that he'd already made his choice. "If they find you helped me," she said, "they'll kill you." "I know." "Why would you—" A horse whinnied outside, close, too close. Jon moved to the window. 2 hunters sat beyond the tree line, watching, waiting for her to run. "Get away from the window," she hissed. And he realized she was protecting him now. Neither of them moved. The fever broke on the 4th day. Jon woke to find her sitting up, watching him sleep on the floor beside the bed. No weapon in her hand, just watching. "You stayed," she said. "You needed water. For 3 days he'd done nothing but tend her." The routine was brutal in its simplicity. Change the bandage every 4 hours, force broth between her teeth when she was lucid enough to swallow, keep her from tearing open the wound in her fever dreams. Once she'd tried to stand, muscle memory, instinct to fight. He'd caught her as she collapsed and held her until she stopped struggling. She hadn't apologized. Now her eyes were clear. Dangerous again. But something was different. The hunters, she said, still there. How many? 3. They changed shifts at dusk. She nodded, processing. Understanding that he'd been watching them, that he'd been calculating. "You lied to them yesterday," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd been awake more than he realized. The village patrol had come again. John had opened the door, friendly and stupid, offered them water, complained about the cold, mentioned he hadn't seen any strangers. They'd left satisfied, bored. "Yes," he said. "Why?" John didn't answer. Instead, he brought her fresh water and the herbs she needed. He'd learned not to waste words. Silence made her less defensive. Silence made space for something else. She drank without arguing. Over the next 2 days, her strength returned in increments. The fever didn't come back. The infection cleared. John began reducing the bandage changes to twice a day, then once. She watched his hands work, the way he moved with precision, never careless, never rough. "Where did you learn this?" she asked. "Animals, injuries, sickness." "You are a healer." It wasn't the way humans said it. No question about it. In her language, she'd spoken it once in her fever. It was a title. Rank. No, just a woodcutter who knows plants. She frowned at this. The distinction seemed to confuse her. In her world, apparently, skill meant status, meant power. On the 6th day, she stood. She gripped the bed frame, legs unsteady, and John didn't move. Didn't offer help. He simply watched, ready. She took 3 steps toward the window, then stopped, breathing hard. Not from pain, from rage at her own weakness. "How long until I can fight?" "A week, maybe more." "We don't have a week," he knew. The hunters were getting restless. He'd seen them moving closer, drawing smaller circles around the cottage. Patience was running thin, but he said, "You do now." That night she ate, not broth. Real food, bread and cheese and the last of his preserved meat. She ate with the focus of someone who'd been starving, and John realized she probably had been, running for days on fear and adrenaline. Bleeding out slowly as she ate, something shifted in her face. Subtle, a loosening of the jaw. The smallest space between her shoulders. "In my clan," she said quietly, "meals are earned. A warrior who cannot fight does not eat." John cut another piece of cheese. Set it on the plate beside her. "You fought long enough. You can rest now." She looked at the cheese, then at him. Her eyes were still hard, but there was something beneath it now. A crack in the armor. Not trust, not yet. But the beginning of it. Outside, the wind howled. Snow fell thick against the window. One of the hunters sat huddled in a makeshift shelter 100 yards away, probably cursing the cold, waiting for her to run. She won't, John thought. Not yet. She was stronger now. Strong enough to be dangerous. Strong enough to know that running meant death, but staying meant something else. Something she was just beginning to understand. He taught her the Orcish words for his herbs without meaning to. She corrected his pronunciation, then caught herself like she'd revealed something. He asked about her clan. She told him nothing, but she answered. Fragments about their structure, their customs. The way warriors were honored above all else. The weakness was a death sentence. She asked why he'd never left the village. He said, "Nowhere to go." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. On the 8th day, she walked to the window. The hunters were gone, not retreated, repositioned. They were closer now. John could see the smoke from their camp through the trees. They weren't hunting anymore. They were waiting, letting her heal, letting her get comfortable, letting her think she might escape. She felt it too. He saw her shoulders go rigid, her hand move instinctively to where her weapon should be. "They're getting ready," she whispered. John said nothing. Because she was right, and because outside in the darkness between the trees, he heard the distant call of a horn. The main force was coming. She didn't leave. Jon expected her to. The smart move was to run while she could, while the cottage was still her only liability. Instead, she sat by the fire and cleaned weapons that didn't exist yet, muscle memory, waiting for the moment she'd need to kill. "Tell me about the prophecy," Jon said. Her hands stopped. "No. You mentioned it." In the fever, she resumed cleaning, the motion deliberate, aggressive, but she answered, "A golden orc will bring change." The clans heard destruction. They've been trying to decide whether to kill me or control me since I was born. Her voice was flat, historical. Apparently, I'm the problem that solves nothing. "Why are you golden?" "I'm not supposed to be." "We're grey, green, stone-coloured. I was born wrong." She looked at her hand, the unmistakable yellow-gold skin, marked with scars. "The prophecy named it, name me, and the clans decided I was either their salvation or their extinction. Which are you?" "I don't know." She finally looked at him. "And I stopped caring who they wanted me to be." Jon brought her tea, something to do, something to break the weight of that confession. She drank it without comment, but something had shifted. She'd answered. She'd told him over the next 3 days, the walls came down in increments. She told him about the betrayal, a lover, someone she'd trusted with her location, her movements, her fear. Someone who'd traded that information for gold and status with the hunters. The clans didn't even know she was the one who'd been hunted. They only knew she'd disappeared. "I was going to die," Khaleesi said quietly, "and die alone. I made peace with it, but you didn't. No, I found you instead." She said it like it was a mistake, like stumbling into his life was something she still wasn't sure about. Jon shared his own silence that night. They were sitting by the fire. She was closer to it now, no longer keeping distance, and she asked why he'd never left the village. "Because I couldn't save her," he said. The words came out before he could stop them. He didn't talk about this. Hadn't in 7 years. "My mother. I was 12. She got sick. The healers in town said it was beyond them. We didn't have money for the royal physicians. She died over 3 weeks while I watched, and I couldn't do anything." He poked at the fire. "After that, I learned everything about healing I could. Herbs, treatments, how to recognize poisons and fevers and infections. I became good at it, but it was too late. She was already gone. So you stayed. So I made sure no one else died because I didn't know how to help them." Khaleesi was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and took his hand. Not gently, not like a human woman would. Her grip was strong, and she held it like she was holding something that mattered. "You saved me," she said. The next morning, a traveler came through the village. Jon was in the forest, gathering sap when he saw the horses, merchants heading south. He didn't think much of it until he returned to find Khaleesi waiting by the window, rigid. "Someone spoke of me," she said. "In the town, I heard." She'd been conscious when the traveler passed on the main road. Someone had mentioned the golden orc that hunters had been tracking, a creature marked by prophecy, dangerous, hunted by the clans. The village had gasped and whispered, and made signs against evil. It was only a matter of time before the connection was made. "We leave tonight." Khaleesi said, "Your wound is healed enough." She pulled up her shirt, and he saw the scar tissue forming. Still red, still angry, but closed. "We go now or we die here." Those are the options, Jon understood. The moment someone in the village realized the golden orc was in the cottage, they'd turn her in for reward money. Or they'd come with torches. "Fear makes people dangerous. Where would we go?" he asked. "East, toward the Orclands. There are places the clans don't hunt. They'll know I helped you." "Yes." "The village will think you were enchanted, bewitched. They'll call you a traitor." Her eyes met his. "I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you're choosing." He did understand. If he left her, he was choosing exile. He was choosing to give up his village, his cottage, his quiet life. He was choosing her over everything he knew. The dangerous part was that he'd already made the decision. "When?" he asked. "Tonight. Before the hunters realize we know." She turned back to the window, and something in her posture changed. She was the warrior again, calculating, alert, ready. But John saw it now. Beneath that was the woman who'd been hunted for her entire life. The woman who'd never had anyone choose her willingly. That evening, as they prepared, gathering supplies, John packing what little he owned, she carved something, a back-scratcher. Simple wood, smooth finish. She couldn't reach her wound properly, and he'd mentioned it once in passing. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. "For after," she said quietly. "When we're moving, when I'm weak and you're the only one who—" She stopped. I looked away. "In case you need a reason to stay with me." He understood then. This wasn't about the prophecy or escape or necessity. This was about a woman who'd been alone her entire life, offering him the smallest piece of herself, offering him a reason to stay. "I don't need a reason," he said. She didn't respond, but her hand stayed in his a moment longer than necessary. Outside, the forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. The wind had shifted. And in the distance, carried on the winter air, came the low, resonant sound of a horn, not the small hunter's signal from days ago. This was deeper, richer. The war horn of the clans. Khaleesi's entire body went rigid. "They're here," she whispered. And this time, she didn't tell him to run. They came like a storm, not hunters. An army. 20 warriors on horseback, armor gleaming even in the darkness, carrying standards John couldn't read. Behind them, more on foot, 50, 100. The cottage was surrounded in minutes. No escape. No option for flight. John reached for a weapon, one of the old knives from the cottage, but Khaleesi stopped him with a look. "Stay inside," she said. "No matter what happens, they'll burn us out." "I know." She walked out the door before he could argue. John watched from the window as the lead warrior dismounted. Massive, scarred, moving with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight. The orc's eyes locked on Khaleesi, and John saw the recognition flash across his face like lightning. The warrior dropped to one knee. So did everyone else. 50 warriors. 100. Every single one, kneeling in the snow. John's stomach turned to ice. "War leader," the warrior said, and his voice carried the weight of ceremony. "You honor us with your return." Khaleesi stood motionless, golden skin catching the torchlight, and John realized he'd been seeing her wrong the entire time. Not a refugee, not a hunted woman, a commander. Everything about her, the way she stood, the weight of her silence, the authority that moved through her like blood. It all made sudden, terrible sense. "You were supposed to be hunting me," she said flatly. "We were. Until the prophecy was reinterpreted." The warrior rose. "The elders sent us to bring you home. The clans are fractured. The southern tribes challenge the old ways. The humans push at our borders. They need their war leader. War leader." The words hit John like an axe. She was their leader. Not just a noble, not just a warrior. The war leader of the northern clans, the one who commanded armies, the one who made decisions that killed thousands, and she'd been bleeding on his bed, eating his food, letting him teach her how to make tea. "You can't stay here, war leader," the warrior continued. "The prophecy, I don't care about the prophecy. The humans have corrupted you. No one has corrupted me." Khaleesi's voice was iron, but John heard the tremor beneath it. She was choosing her words carefully, choosing how much to reveal, choosing him even as the weight of everything she was crashed down around them. "I came here to escape the hunting. I found shelter. That's all." It was a lie, small but deliberate. She was protecting him by lying. She was telling them he meant nothing, that he was just, what, a tool? A necessity. A human woodcutter who happened to know how to stop an infection. Something broke in John's chest. The warrior's eyes narrowed. He looked back at the cottage, and John realized the moment the calculation changed in his face. "Where is he?" the warrior asked. "He's no one. Where is the human?" The door exploded inward. Hands grabbed John before he could move. Warriors pulled him into the snow, throwing him to his knees beside Khaleesi. The cold was a shock. The sight of so many was worse. They were enormous. Every single one taller than him, broader, scarred with the marks of battle. They looked at him like he was an animal. "This is the human you've been protecting," the warrior said. It wasn't a question. He turned back to Khaleesi. "The prophecy spoke of change, war leader. Not betrayal. He's not. The clan sent us to bring you home to lead. Instead, we find you've bedded a human." The warrior's voice was controlled, but there was an edge beneath it. Fury. Disappointment. "The prophecy says a golden orc will bring salvation or ruin. Was this your choice? Is this the change you've decided on?" Jon looked at Khaleesi, really looked at her. And he saw it all at once, not the woman by the fire, but the war leader in her quarters. The commander who made decisions about life and death. The noble who'd never once mentioned that she controlled armies. She'd let him believe she was just a refugee, just hunted, just small enough to fit into his cottage and his life. She'd lied to him. "You said you didn't know who you were," Jon heard himself say. His voice was barely his own. "You said the prophecy was a cage. You said, I know what I said. You never told me you were their leader, because it wouldn't have mattered. It would have mattered." The words came out raw, broken. "It would have mattered because I would have known I was just, what, a place to hide? A tool? You came here bleeding and I helped you. And the entire time you were playing at being human, being small, that's not what this was," she said. And there was genuine pain in her voice, but Jon couldn't hear it over the roar in his own head. She was everything he wasn't, noble, powerful, commanding armies. And he was a woodcutter, nobody, a human in a village so small the world forgot it existed. How could she ever have wanted that? How could someone who commanded thousands ever choose him? The warrior cleared his throat. "War leader, the prophecy was clear. You will either save the clans or destroy them. This human, this weakness, it's a choice. Choose the clans, come home. Leave the human, and we forget this happened." Khaleesi didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Jon, and her eyes were fierce with something he couldn't name. "I came here because I was dying," she said quietly, "only for him. But I stayed because of you. Because you looked at me and saw a person, not a prophecy. Not a tool, not a weapon. You saw me, but I don't know who you are," Jon said. "I don't know anything about you." The warrior raised his hand, and arrows were nocked. "Choose, war leader," he said. "The human or the clans. You don't get both." Khaleesi stepped forward, placing herself between Jon and the archers. The prophecy warrior, the one in command, hesitated for just a moment, uncertain. No one had ever stood between him and the war leader before. The hesitation lasted exactly long enough for one of the younger hunters to make a decision. An arrow flew. It wasn't aimed at Khaleesi. The hunters knew better. It was aimed at the problem, the human who'd corrupted her, the tool that needed to be removed. Jon felt it before he understood it, white-hot pain across his ribs, the arrow punching through muscle and bone. He staggered, gasped, and then Khaleesi was there. Catching him as he fell, she held him against her chest, and her mask shattered completely. "No," she whispered, and it was the most terrified thing Jon had ever heard. "No, no, no," the warrior started to speak, but Khaleesi's head snapped up, and something in her expression went cold, lethal. She looked down at the blood on her hands, his blood, and when she looked back at the hunters, there was no more negotiation in her eyes, only war. "I'm going to ask you once," she said, her voice dropping to something that sounded like the end of the world. "Let him live. Let this village live, and I will come with you. No fight, no resistance. But if you hurt him again, if any of you so much as touch him, I will burn the northern clans to the ground. Prophecy be damned." The warriors shifted, uncertain. The commander warrior stepped forward, and Jon realized with sick clarity that this was the moment. This was where she'd have to choose. "War leader," the warrior said softly, "what are you willing to sacrifice?" And Khaleesi, still holding Jon's bleeding form against her, answered in a voice that echoed across the snow, "Everything." The commander warrior didn't move. Jon's vision swam. The arrow was still in his chest. He could feel it, hot and wrong, pinning him to the moment. Khaleesi was holding him upright, her body shielding his, and she was speaking in Orcish now. Fast, furious, absolute. The warriors exchanged looks. War leader, the commander said carefully. You're in shock. The human is, I know what he is, Khaleesi snapped. And I'm making you an offer. She lowered Jon gently to the snow, and he saw her hand shake as she pulled away. Just for a second, just enough to know how much it cost her to let him go. Release the human. Release this village. Let them live. Her voice was steady again, the commander returning. And I will come with you. No resistance. No escape attempts. No more hunting required. I will return to the northern clans, and I will accept whatever judgment the elders decide. And the prophecy? The warrior asked. The prophecy spoke of change. This is it. I choose a life I build, not one built for me. That's the change. That's what you're afraid of. The village was in chaos now. Humans screaming, running, gathering children. The cottage burned. Someone had set it deliberately, cutting off any possibility of shelter. Jon watched his entire life burn and felt nothing but cold. Then a figure stepped out from the crowd of warriors. Jon recognized him before Khaleesi did. The way her entire body went rigid told him everything. Hello, love, the man said. He was beautiful in the way warriors were, scarred, powerful, moving with absolute confidence. His skin was grey-green, and his eyes held something that made Jon's stomach turn, the look of someone who'd already won. Karn, Khaleesi breathed. And the name was a curse. Karn, the commander confirmed, gesturing him forward, was chosen to track you, to bring you home, or to explain your absence to the elders, Karn smiled. I did bring her home, he said, walking toward Khaleesi slowly, like she was prey. Just took longer than expected. Didn't think you'd run all the way to a human settlement. Didn't think you'd let a human touch you? Jon understood then. The betrayer, the lover, the one who'd sold her location to the hunters in the first place. You tried to kill me, Khaleesi said. I tried to make you strong, Karn corrected. The elders needed to see if you'd survive. If the prophecy's golden orc was truly chosen. And you did survive. You're here, alive, powerful. His eyes slid to Jon, bleeding on the snow. Though apparently now you're broken. I'm not broken, Khaleesi said. No? Then prove it, Karn gestured to the hunters. They raised their weapons. Prove your loyalty, war leader. Kill the human. Right here. Right now. Show the clans that your duty to them matters more than whatever you've imagined in this little cottage. He stepped closer. Then come home. Be the leader we need. Forget this weakness. The snow was falling harder now. The fire from the cottage cast everything in orange and shadow. Jon watched Khaleesi's face, watched her hand move toward the weapon at her side, and he understood with terrible clarity she was going to do it. Not because she wanted to, but because saying no meant dying. Meant everyone she tried to protect dying. The village was defenseless. The hunters surrounded them. If she refused, they'd slaughter every human here for sport. She was trapped. No, Jon said. His voice was barely a whisper, but Khaleesi heard it. They all heard it. He pushed himself up on his elbows, blood seeping through his shirt, and met Karn's eyes. Don't do this, Jon said. Don't let him win. Don't let fear win, Karn laughed. The human speaks. How touching. You can leave, Jon continued, looking only at Khaleesi. You can go with them. I understand. Save the village. Save your people. I understand that choice. Khaleesi's hand trembled. But don't kill me to prove you're strong enough. Don't sacrifice us to satisfy them. Jon pushed himself up further despite the agony. If you're the war leader of the prophecy, prove it now. Not by killing. By choosing. By choosing what? Karn asked, amused. Jon looked back at Khaleesi. By choosing me. By choosing that some things matter more than prophecy. More than duty. More than what they want. The human is delirious, Karn said to the commander. Should we? Khaleesi moved. 1 second she was standing, uncertain. The next, she'd drawn her weapon and was advancing on Karn with the speed and precision of a predator. Their blades met with a sound like thunder, and the hunters scrambled back, creating space for the fight. It was beautiful and terrible. Karn was skilled. His blades sang as he moved, each strike calculated. But he was fighting to impress. Khaleesi was fighting to survive. She moved with desperation and fury, with the weight of every lie, every betrayal, every moment she'd trusted someone who'd failed her. The duel lasted 3 minutes. It felt like hours. Karn overextended on a thrust, and Khaleesi disarmed him. His weapon flew into the snow. Before he could move, she had her blade at his throat. "This is the change," she said, breathing hard. "Not your war, not your prophecy. My choice." She didn't kill him. Instead, she turned to face the hunters, blade still in hand, and spoke in a voice that carried across the snow, across the burning cottage, across the terrified village. "I am Khaleesi, war leader of the northern clans. The prophecy spoke of change, and I'm telling you what that change is. I will not return to lead you into more war. I will not sacrifice myself to satisfy your fear of the unknown." She paused, and every warrior was silent. "But I offer you something better. A path forward, a way to build something new." The commander warrior stepped forward slowly. "War leader, the clans will not accept—" "I don't care what the clans accept," Khaleesi said, "because I'm done accepting their rules. I'm done being the weapon they want me to be." She walked back to Jon and knelt beside him. Her hands were shaking as she carefully removed the arrow, and Jon bit back a scream. She didn't apologize. She just worked with the precision he'd taught her, stanching the blood with fabric from her own clothes. "Can you stand?" she asked. "No? Try anyway." He did. She helped him up, and they stood together, a massive golden orc and a bleeding human, facing down an army. "The prophecy spoke of a yellow orc," Jon said quietly. "And despite everything, despite the pain and the cold and the impossible odds, he was smiling. But it never said what she'd choose." Khaleesi's grip on him tightened. The commander warrior looked at his soldiers, looked back at Khaleesi, and slowly, deliberately, he lowered his weapon. "This is not the change we expected, war leader," he said. "But perhaps it is the change we deserve." One by one, the warriors stood down. Not all of them retreated. Some remained uncertain, watching. But the immediate threat dissolved. The hunters who'd fired the arrow looked uncertain. Karn, disarmed on the snow, looked furious. The commander walked toward Khaleesi and Jon braced himself. But the warrior simply knelt, the formal gesture of a soldier acknowledging his leader's choice. "The clans will be fractured," he said. "Some will reject this. Some will call you a traitor." "I know," Khaleesi said. "You could change your mind. Come back, still be the war leader we need." "No," she said. And this time there was peace in her voice, certainty. "I could have, but I've seen what I want now, and it's not power. It's this." She gestured at the burning village, the snow, the human woodcutter bleeding beside her. At the impossible, ridiculous, beautiful choice she'd made, the commander nodded slowly and stood. "Then I will tell the elders that Khaleesi, the Prophesied One, has chosen her path. And I will advocate for the clans to accept it. Not all of them will. Not immediately." He looked at Jon with something that might have been respect. But perhaps the prophecy was right after all. Perhaps change, true change, begins with someone choosing something the world never expected. He turned to his warriors. "We leave at dawn. Anyone who chooses to stay and accept this new path is welcome. Anyone who chooses to return to the old ways is welcome to do so. But we do not hunt the war leader. Not anymore." The hunters began to disperse, some reluctant, some relieved. The fire continued to burn. The village began to emerge from hiding, watching the golden orc and the wounded humans standing together in the snow. Jon was bleeding through Khaleesi's makeshift bandage. His legs were failing, but when she tried to move him toward what shelter remained, he grabbed her arm. "Don't regret this," he said. Khaleesi looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her face shifted. The warrior fell away. The leader fell away. What remained was simply a woman who'd chosen love over everything. "Never," she said. And as the sun rose over the burning cottage, over the scattered warriors, over the impossible future they'd somehow created together, they held each other in the snow. The prophecy was finally silent. The wound healed slowly. Jon was bedridden for 2 weeks, not in the cottage, which was ash now, but in a shelter the village built for them. Khaleesi never left his side. She learned to change bandages with the same care he'd shown her. She learned to make healing teas, to recognize infection, to sit in silence while he slept. The roles had reversed completely. She was the one who tended him now. Word spread through the Orc clans like wildfire. Some rejected the union outright. The southern tribes called Khaleesi weak, called for her removal, and called for war. But the younger warriors began to listen. The progressive voices grew louder, and slowly, impossibly, a new idea took root, that a war leader who could choose peace was stronger than one who only knew violence. Khaleesi didn't return to lead the clans in the traditional way. Instead, she built something new, a bridge between worlds. She established a meeting place between human and Orc lands, neutral ground where trade and understanding could grow. The humans, terrified at first, saw that she wasn't a conqueror. She was a guardian, a protector. She was someone who'd chosen love over conquest. The village that had nearly turned her in began to see her differently. They built the new settlement together, human and Orc side by side. It was awkward at first, uncomfortable, but it worked. Jon established a healing house. He trained younger humans and Orcs both, passing on everything Khaleesi had taught him, everything he'd learned watching her survive. His knowledge became valuable. His name became known. He was no longer invisible, no longer the strange woodcutter no one wanted. He was the human who'd won the heart of the Prophesied One. But it came with a cost. He could never go back to the village proper. Some humans still saw him as a traitor, still whispered that he'd been enchanted, bewitched, turned against his own kind. The life he'd built, his cottage, his solitude, his safety, all of it was gone. Khaleesi gave up more. She renounced her claim to formal leadership of the northern clans. Some saw it as weakness. Others saw it as wisdom. The clans fractured, and she didn't fight to hold them together. Instead, she let them choose their own path, even knowing some would reject her, hunt her, call her the prophecy's greatest failure. But she gained something worth the cost, a life that was hers. 1 year later, in a rebuilt cottage on the border between worlds, they sat by a fire. This cabin was different from Jon's first one, larger with space for both their worlds. Orc weapons hung beside human herbs. His books shared shelves with her maps. It was a home they'd built together, imperfect and beautiful. Khaleesi was feverish again, not from injury, from illness, something that came with the changing season. And just like before, Jon tended her. He brought her water. He prepared the medicines. He sat by her side through the long nights, but as she drifted in fever, she didn't call out in fear. She called out the Orcish word he'd taught her, the one for home, Jon realized. In that moment, that she'd found what she was looking for. Not power, not prophecy, just this, a place where she belonged. A person who chose her, again and again. When her fever broke, he was still there. She woke to find him asleep in the chair beside the bed, exactly as he'd been through every night of her illness. His hand rested on the blanket, close enough to touch. She took his hand gently and held it. Outside the window, snow began to fall. The same winter forest that had hunted her. The same trees she'd stumbled through bleeding and broken. But now they were beautiful. Now they were home. A knock came at the door, a messenger from the clans. There was talk of war with the southern tribes. There were decisions to be made. There were people who needed the Prophesied One. Khaleesi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Jon, at this ordinary human who'd become extraordinary simply by choosing her. By seeing her. By loving her despite everything. "Tell them I'm with my family," she finally said. "Tell them the prophecy was fulfilled the moment I decided my own fate. And tell them," she paused, squeezing Jon's hand, "tell them the change they feared has already come. And it looks like peace." Jon woke as she spoke, and their eyes met across the small room. No grand declarations, no promises of forever. Just the quiet, revolutionary understanding that they'd chosen each other. Not because destiny demanded it, but because love did. The prophecy spoke of a yellow orc, but it never said she would find a human named John who saw not the prophecy. But her, it never said she would love him so fiercely that the impossible became inevitable. It never said that sometimes the greatest prophecy is the one we write ourselves. But here's the real question. When you had to choose between the life everyone expected you to live and the life you actually wanted, what did you choose? And would you have the courage to do what Khaleesi did?